The rider didn't look like much through the dust, just a blur of cloth, leather, and blood where the leg ought to be whole. But that voice cut cleaner than a Bowie knife. "Don't shoot," it said, hoarse but steady. "I'm not a man." Ezekiel Holt didn't lower the rifle. Not yet. The rider slumped sideways in the saddle, one hand barely holding the horn, the other raised. Long hair hung matted with sweat and road dust, framing a face that might have been mistaken for a boy's. Angular, sharp, burnt by sun, if not for the eyes. The eyes were too heavy, too knowing, too tired. Apache eyes. From the shadows of the barn, Ezekiel kept his breath slow, finger curled around the trigger. Behind the rider, the sun bled orange over the high desert, casting long blue shadows across the fields. One of his horses shifted nervously in the corral, snorting. Buzzards circled like bad omens high above. Then the rider's voice cracked again. Not pleading, just plain. "I can't ride much farther." Ezekiel stepped out from behind the stall, slowly, boots crunching straw. His rifle stayed leveled. He saw now the blood wasn't just on the leg. It soaked through the saddle blanket, pooled in the stirrup. The rider's lips were pale. There wouldn't be much time. But Ezekiel didn't move to help. Not yet. He'd fought too many wars to trust pretty words from strangers. And this one had Apache markings burned into her saddle, into the deerskin on her wrist. That bow slung over her shoulder wasn't for decoration. And yet, she was barely upright, breathing shallow, swaying like a leaf in a dust storm. "You packin' a trick under that shirt?" he asked. She blinked slow, then shook her head. Just a wound and a prayer. Her horse took one more step before collapsing under her. She didn't cry out when she hit the dirt, just rolled, coughed once, and lay still. Ezekiel cursed low under his breath. "Don't do it," came his brother's voice in his head. "You bring an Apache under your roof, and you may as well paint a target on your barn. Town's already looking for a reason, but let's go back to where it all started." The year was 1878. And the last monsoon rains had long baked out of the soil. The land was brittle now, the kind that snapped under a boot heel and turned cattle lame. Dry winds whistled through brittle mesquite, and water had to be drawn like blood, slow, hard, and always with a little pain. Ezekiel Holt lived alone, 6 miles outside Dead Briar. 37, tall, shoulders heavy from war and time. He wasn't born mean, but the world had scoured most softness off his bones. He built his ranch after the war, one beam at a time, dragging timber by mule through Apache land. Had a younger brother once, Micah, killed in the Red River skirmish. 1 minute riding beside him, next minute, gone with the arrow still humming in his ribs. Folks in town didn't forget that kind of thing. Neither did Zeke. He didn't keep photos. Just a single locket buried in a drawer and a wood carving Micah made when they were boys, crooked and chipped, but still shaped like a horse if you squinted. That and the rifle. Springfield 73. He kept it clean, but close. Dead Briar was the sort of town that judged in silence. Nobody outright said who to hate, but there were glances, nods, and 100 unspoken rules. If you weren't white, or didn't believe in the same God, or wore braids instead of hats, you weren't welcome. Not really. And if you helped someone who didn't fit that mold well, that made you dangerous too. Ezekiel wasn't looking for trouble the day she rode in. He'd spent the morning fixing a busted fence and cursing the cow that kicked it loose. The sun hadn't spared him any mercy, and his shirt stuck to his back like glue. He didn't notice the rider at first, just the shadow flickering across the barn wall. By the time he reached for his rifle, she was already halfway down the trail. Now, kneeling beside her in the dirt, Ezekiel got a better look. The wound was deep, through the thigh. Arrowhead, by the shape, could have come from another tribe, or a white man playing at hunting. Hard to say out here, but there was no denying it. She was Apache, younger than he thought, maybe 20, maybe younger. Her hands were rough with work, but the lines around her mouth spoke of loss. Familiar loss. She opened her eyes, barely. "You gonna leave me here?" she asked. Zeke stared at her for a long second. Then two. The wind kicked up a little, blowing grit into his beard. "No," he said finally. and slid his rifle over his shoulder. But that don't mean I trust you. I don't blame you. He lifted her under the arms. She winced, but didn't cry out. That alone said something. She was light as a feather and twice as brittle. He carried her into the barn and laid her on the cot near the back, where he once kept feed sacks before the mice got into them. He washed the wound, grumbling the whole time. She bit her lip but didn't scream, not even when he poured whiskey over it. "What's your name?" he asked finally, tying a strip of cloth tight around her leg. She hesitated. "Tallulah." He nodded once. "Zeke." They didn't speak much after that. She passed out by the time the stars came out, breath shallow, lips dry. He sat on a crate nearby, rifle across his lap, listening to the coyotes call somewhere off near the hills. He should have sent her on. Let the desert finish what the arrow started. Instead, he sat there all night, watching her chest rise and fall, and wondering what kind of fool lets old ghosts back in the door. And outside the barn, unnoticed in the shadows, a single mark carved into the dirt. A tribal glyph. Someone had followed her here. Ezekiel didn't sleep that night. He sat near the open barn doors, boots planted firm, Springfield laid across his lap. The wind had a way of whispering doubts louder than men ever dared to speak. Every cricket chirp, every rustle of dry grass outside made his eyes flick toward the dark. Tallulah stirred once or twice, never fully waking. The fever had come on quick, like the wound hadn't just been from an arrow, but from something cursed and festering. He'd seen it before in soldiers, infection winding its way through the blood like a snake through brush. By morning, her brow glistened with sweat, and she murmured things in Apache he couldn't understand. He brought her water. She drank a little, coughed, slept again. Around mid-morning, he heard the hoofbeats. Not many, just 2, but that was enough. He didn't move, just let the curtain of barn shadow keep him hidden. The riders slowed when they neared the trailhead. Didn't come up the hill, not yet, but paused at the bend, just far enough that he couldn't make out their faces. One pointed toward the barn. The other shook his head. They turned back, leaving behind a cloud of dust that hung in the air long after they'd vanished. Zeke exhaled slow. They were looking for her, and it wouldn't be the last time. By noon, she was conscious. Barely. Zeke knelt beside her again, swapped the bandage, gave her a sip of water laced with ground willow bark. "You don't run, do you?" he asked, wiping her forehead. Her lip curled faintly. "Only when they're faster." Zeke didn't smile, but something tugged in the corner of his face. He set the cup aside. "Someone came looking. Didn't come close. But they will." Tallulah blinked, the fevered sheen in her eyes dimmer now. "They'll come at night. Quiet." "Who are they?" She hesitated. "White soldiers. 2 days behind. But the ones this morning. Apache. My own." He looked at her hard. "Your own people were tracking you?" "I left without asking." Her voice was quiet. "Some don't like that." Zeke leaned back against the stall post. "You done something to deserve an arrow in the leg?" She was silent. He didn't press. Not yet. That evening, he hauled her to the porch so she could breathe fresh air. The sun painted everything gold. The fence posts, the horse trough, the dust that floated up from his boots. Tallulah squinted toward the horizon. "Why'd you help me?" she asked. Zeke scratched his beard. "Didn't say I did. Maybe I'm just waiting for you to get strong enough to throw off the land myself." Tallulah gave a dry chuckle. "You're a terrible liar." "Yeah, that's what got my brother killed." Her face shifted. Not pity, but recognition. "Red River?" she asked. Zeke looked up, eyes narrowing. "How'd you know?" "I was a child when the army came. Your brother was one of them." She paused. "He spared my mother." That hung between them like a rattler in the grass. Quiet, coiled, waiting. "Micah Holt?" she asked after a moment. He wore beads tied to his wrist. Zeke swallowed, looked away. "Yeah." She nodded once. "I remember him." He stood, suddenly uncomfortable. "You should rest. I'll check the water line." But before he stepped down from the porch, she spoke again. "You don't owe me anything." He paused, boots crunching wood. "I know. Then why risk it?" Zeke stared at the horizon. The sky was starting to bruise purple in the east. Because if I'd left you to die, he said, voice low, I'd have to look Micah in the eyes one day. He didn't wait for a response. Just walked into the growing dark. Next day, town found out. He was restocking his supplies at Murphy's Mercantile. Flour, coffee, and a few strips of dried beef. Mrs. Calloway, who ran the post office, stood near the crates of beans, peering at him like a hen who smells a fox too close to her coop. You were out past sundown last night, she said, lips tight. Zeke nodded. Fence work. She sniffed. Funny. Jackson said he saw firelight in your barn. And shadows. Zeke set the sack of flour on the counter with a little too much force. You callin' me a liar? I'm sayin', there's been word. Her voice lowered. Apache riders seen outside town. 3 dead at Old Mill Creek. You know what that means. Zeke said nothing. Murphy, behind the counter, cleared his throat. Folks get nervous, Zeke. They hear talk. They remember your brother was scalped. He wasn't scalped, Zeke said flatly. He was buried proper. Murphy sighed. We're just sayin'. If you see anything or anyone out there that don't belong, I'll do what needs doing, Zeke said, picking up his supplies. Mrs. Calloway didn't move. Town won't forget if you pick the wrong side. Zeke turned back, eyes cold. Ain't no side I trust. He left the store with silence trailing him like a shadow. That night, a stone hit his window. Just one. Gentle. Deliberate. He lit the lamp and stepped outside, rifle in hand. A figure stood at the edge of his fence. Young. Nervous. Wearing a preacher's son's hat. Jed. Zeke muttered. What the hell are you? Jed gestured for silence and walked closer. They're talking about you, he said under his breath. Some of the ranchers. Calloway. Murphy. That sheriff from Apple Ridge too. They're saying you're harboring a savage. Zeke didn't answer. I don't believe it, Jed added quickly. But they're riding out here tomorrow night. Armed. Zeke's eyes narrowed. You sure? They said if you've got one of them on your land, they'll smoke the barn first. Ask questions later. Zeke looked toward the barn, where Tallulah slept in the loft. He saw the faint glow of the lamp inside. Then back at Jed. Thanks, he said, and started walking. Jed called after him. You gonna send her off? Zeke didn't turn. I ain't decided yet. But the truth was already burning in his gut. They wouldn't wait for him to decide. The next morning came with a red sky, the kind sailors warned about and old ranchers cursed under their breath. Ezekiel knew the color. It wasn't the color of sunrise. It was the color of blood on sand. Tallulah was awake when he entered the barn. Sitting now, propped against a bale of hay, her legs still wrapped but the fever broken. Her eyes were clearer, sharper. You heard? He asked. I heard the owl call last night, she said. Twice. That only happens before death or change. Zeke leaned on a post, hat low over his brow. Town's comin'. Sundown. About 6 of 'em. Armed. Tallulah didn't flinch, just reached slowly for her bow where it lay against the wall. You should go, Zeke said. She paused. Where? North, maybe. There's land up near the Salt Fork. Pines. Elk. No one looks too hard up there. She gave him a look. It wasn't anger, just tiredness. I can't run again. Zeke crossed his arms. If you stay, they'll light the barn. That's not a guess. Tallulah looked down at her hands, rough and calloused. I didn't steal. I didn't kill. I only left. That don't matter to them, Zeke said. To them, you /re-Apache. She nodded once. And to you. Zeke was quiet for a long time. Then, to me, you're someone my brother might have spared for a reason. They said nothing after that. The wind picked up, blowing grit through the cracks in the wood. Outside, the land seemed to brace itself. Horses were skittish. Chickens refused to come out the coop. Even the dog barked at shadows and then went quiet. That afternoon, Zeke dug. He turned the soil behind the barn, where the ground softened near the cottonwoods. A place no one would think to look. He'd once buried an injured calf here. This time he laid down something else. A folded blanket. A canteen. Flint. jerky, a pouch of coins. Escape, packed in silence. Tallulah stood on her own now, though she leaned on the wall. She watched him through the slats. "I thought you were digging a grave," she said when he came back inside. "Maybe I was," he replied, "but I figured it's better to dig for the living." The sun dipped low. Red bled into gold, then into blue. And then came the sound Zeke had been dreading all day. Hoofbeats. 6, maybe 7. Slow. Deliberate. He stepped outside with his rifle slung low, not raised. The dust cloud rolled toward him like a slow-breathing beast, and when it settled, he saw their faces. Murphy, Calloway's son, Ellis, Sheriff Grayson from Apple Ridge, 2 ranchers he didn't know by name, and one he did, Jed. The boy looked down, couldn't meet Zeke's eyes. Murphy nudged his horse forward. "Evenin', Holt." Zeke nodded once. "Evenin', we heard tell you've got company. I've got a barn full of feed and a sick horse. You want to check it out?" Grayson leaned forward in his saddle. "We ain't here for horses." Zeke raised an eyebrow. "You bring torches?" Ellis spit into the dirt. "We ain't lightin' nothin'. Not unless you force us to." "And how would I do that?" Zeke asked. "By givin' someone shelter?" Murphy's lip twitched. "By harborin' a savage. One of the same that burned McClary's field. Shot old man Rigsby last month. Maybe even your own brother." Zeke's face didn't move. "That was a different war." "They're all the same war," Grayson said quietly. "You just forgot which side you're on." The silence then was tight as wire. Tallulah stepped out from the barn. Slow, deliberate, limping, but upright. She wore no weapon, just the tattered shirt, the bandaged leg, and a look that cut through every man there like a blade. "I came here wounded," she said. "I never stole, never killed. I left because my people wanted me married to a man who already buried 2 wives." Murphy reached for his pistol. Zeke raised his rifle halfway, not aiming, just ready. "You raise that gun," he said, voice low, "and you better pray you fire first. Don't test me, Holt. She's unarmed. She's Apache. She's a person," Zeke said. "And you light my barn, I'll light the man who throws the match." Jed cleared his throat. His voice cracked when he spoke. She saved a boy. 3 weeks ago. Kid from the rail crew. Bit by a snake. His mother said it was a native girl that sucked the venom. Everyone turned toward him. She ran before they could thank her, Jed said. "But the boy, he's still alive." Tallulah looked at him, surprised. "Zeke too." Jed shrugged. "Figured if y'all get to tell stories, I'll tell mine." Murphy shifted in the saddle. The air suddenly didn't feel so justified. Sheriff Grayson looked between them, jaw set. Then he turned his horse. "Let's go," he said. Murphy didn't move. "She might bring the rest of them. More Apaches." "She's alone," Grayson replied. "You want to start a war over one girl?" Murphy grunted. "You're soft." "Maybe," Grayson said, "but soft still shoots." They rode off slowly. Jed lingered. "Thank you," Tallulah said. Jed tipped his hat. "Don't thank me yet. Some of em might come back tomorrow. Or next week. Maybe drunk. Maybe angry. I'll be gone," she said. He nodded. "Ride quiet." Then he left. Zeke stood next to her, watching the horizon burn behind retreating hooves. "You still think you can't run?" he asked. She looked at the mountains, the kind that hid secrets and survivors. "I think I can try," she said. That night, under stars so bright they looked like holes punched in the sky, he led her to the buried bundle. No words, just a quiet nod, a touch to the shoulder, and a glance that said more than gratitude could carry. She disappeared into the dark before the coyotes howled. Zeke stood there long after, listening, waiting. The wind changed 2 days after she left. Came down from the north, sharp and cold, like the mountains were sending a warning. It whistled through the barn slats and tugged at the roof shingles like a child testing the strength of paper. Zeke patched the fence, chopped wood, fixed the hinge on the chicken coop, did all the things that usually kept a man grounded. But the ground didn't feel so steady anymore. At night, he found himself listening again, not for gunshots or hoofbeats, For silence. For the kind that follows after something good's been taken from the world. There was no word, no sign, no fire on the hills or war cries in the distance. But Zeke felt it. Something coming. Then one evening, she came back. Not on a horse. On foot. Her hair was tied back. Her face worn. A fresh scar sliced across the cheekbone. But her eyes were the same. Maybe older. Maybe stronger. Definitely not broken. Zeke was standing near the corral when he saw her. She didn't wave. Just stepped over the fence like she'd never left. "You look terrible," he said. "You're still ugly," he replied. And just like that, the quiet in his chest lifted a little. She handed him something, wrapped in deerskin. He unwrapped it slow. It was a beaded armband. Red and white. Micah's colors. "They found it in an old trunk," she said. "Said your brother gave it to a child once. That child was my cousin." Zeke stared at it for a long time. The beads were faded but solid, still strung together like they been waiting to be remembered. "I thought it was lost," he said. "So did we." They sat under the porch as night fell, not talking much. The crickets took over the silence. The moon rose pale and low, casting everything in silver light. "I didn't run far," she said after a while. "Found an old trader camp up north. Half-bloods, outcasts, people with nowhere else." He nodded. "That sounds about right. They want to build something, not just survive-live. Make a life with rules different than war." Zeke looked at her. "And you?" "I told them I knew a man who could build a barn that don't fall in wind." He laughed once. The first real laugh in months. Maybe years. "You offering me a job? I'm offering you a choice." He leaned back against the porch post, stared out at the hills where Micah once rode, where he himself once buried anger deep enough to pretend it wasn't there. "You know they'll never stop," he said. "Folks like Murphy, towns like Dead Briar, they'll always need an enemy." "Then we stop giving them one," she said. "We give them something else to talk about. Something quiet. Something good." She stood. "I'll leave in the morning. Head back north." Zeke stood too. "You got room for another rider?" She looked him over. Eyes soft, but certain. Always. He didn't pack much. Just tools. A rifle. The armband. As dawn broke over the prairie, they rode together into the wind. No destination, just a direction. And somewhere far behind, in a town too small to hold a future, the barn stood empty but whole, with no blood on its beams and no fire in its bones. Just silence. And one carved post with Micah's initials still faint beneath the dust. Years later, folks would tell stories of a strange settlement in the northern pines, a place where languages mixed and names changed, where children played under flags no army had ever raised, and where Apache women taught white boys to fish, and old ranchers built barns stronger than steel. They'd never believe it started with a wounded rider who said, "Don't shoot, I'm not a man," and a man who finally listened. The trees up north grew thicker than any Zeke had ever seen. Pines so tall they touched the clouds. Roots deep in black soil that never cracked in the sun. The land here breathed different, slow, calm, as if it had no memory of blood or fire. The settlement was small, but real. Cabins built with mismatched hands. Apache, settler, runaway, orphan. Tools traded for pelts. Meals shared in silence. No sheriffs. No laws written on paper. Just quiet understandings carved by survival, hardship, and the stubborn kindness of those who stayed. Zeke's hands were older now. More bent. More scarred. But they still worked. He built cabins by moonlight and taught young ones how to plane board straight. His beard had gone silver at the edges. The rifle still hung over his door, untouched for 3 winters. And Tallulah? She wore her hair braided now, not loose. A feather woven into one strand. A mark of her choice to live, not flee. She spoke softly and often, taught 3 languages to the children, sat by dying elders with songs on her lips. The scar on her cheek faded but never vanished. They never married, not in the way papers or churches required. But they stayed. That was enough. One day in late autumn, a boy came running from the river trail, 11 years old, half white, half Hopi, breathless, wide-eyed. 3 men, horses, rifles. Zeke stood. His knees groaned with the cold. Tallulah was already reaching for the bow she hadn't touched in months. Who are they? She asked. The boy shook his head. Didn't get close. But they're ridin' hard. The old quiet returned. The kind that made birds hush and firewood crack louder than it should. Word spread fast. A few men went for rifles. Most didn't. Zeke saddled his horse. Tallulah frowned. You're going alone? He checked the stirrup, grunted. I'll talk. That's all. You sure? No. But I'm tired of waiting for ghosts. He met them on the edge of the ridge, where the forest thinned into prairie again. Just past the ridge where the soil changed from dark to dust. 3 men. Dusty. Pale. Leather badges. One looked barely old enough to shave. The oldest leaned forward in the saddle. Name's Howard. Federal Scout. Heard there's a gathering here. Off the map. Zeke said nothing. Howard continued. We ain't here to burn. Just to look. They say there's Apache and white folk living together up here. That true? Zeke scratched his beard. Depends who's asking. We're asking 'cause Washington's asking. They want to know if this is a threat. Zeke stared at them for a moment, then pointed toward the trees. You see that pine over there? Howard followed his finger. Yeah. Underneath it, a boy's learning how to fish, not to fight. His mother's Apache. His father was a Union soldier. Howard blinked. Behind that, Zeke continued, is a woman who bakes cornbread for a kid who don't speak her language. And next to her is a rancher who once killed an Apache and now builds his son a toy horse with her blessing. Howard shifted in his saddle. You still lookin' for a threat? Zeke asked. The younger scout cleared his throat. No, sir. Howard didn't speak, just stared at Zeke for a long time. Then he turned his horse. Tell your people to stay quiet, he said. You stay quiet, we stay away. Zeke nodded. Deal. They rode off without another word. Zeke didn't watch them go. He just turned his horse back toward the trees. That night, the fire was warm, and the air smelled like roasted squash and cedar. Children laughed. Music hummed low, half flute, half fiddle. Tallulah sat beside Zeke, legs curled beneath her. She handed him a cup of coffee. Hot. Strong. What did they say? He sipped. They're gone. She smiled. And you? I'm still here. He looked around, at the people, the cabins, the lanterns swaying in the wind. It's not much, he said. But it's ours, she finished. They sat in silence after that. The kind of silence that doesn't need breaking. High above, the stars blinked like watchers, soft and ancient. A coyote howled far off, but it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a prayer answered. And under that sky, on land that once knew only war and fear, something strange and holy had taken root. Peace. Hard-earned. Quiet, but real.